It's 11 o'clock at night, and your house has been without power for 18 hours. It's not an accident. It's not a storm. It's Tuesday, and in Cuba, Tuesdays go dark too. Your food is rotting in a refrigerator that hasn't cooled since sunrise. Your child does their homework by candlelight because the school has no power either. And while you sweat in the dark, just a few meters away in a mansion with its own generators, someone from the Communist Party toasts with champagne on ice. This isn't a temporary crisis, it's a system. Since October 2024, Cuba's national electro-energy system has completely collapsed more than 11 times. Total blackouts, from north to south, from Pinar del Rio to Guantanamo. Each collapse leaves over 9 million people completely in the dark for days, sometimes over a week. In the island's interior, daily outages exceed 70 consecutive hours. In Havana, 18, 20, 24 hours without power is now a routine no one bothers to question out loud anymore. Ask yourself this: how can a country collapse so many times and its rulers still arrogantly call it the achievements of the revolution? The answer begins long before today's blackout. Cuba has been ruled by a single-party dictatorship for over 60 years. There are no free elections, no independent press is allowed, no right to protest without risking an interrogation, an illegal citation, or a prison cell. And those who govern that system appear on state television, night after night, demanding resistance, sacrifice, and unity from the people against what they call Yankee imperialism, while they themselves never suffer a blackout, never stand in a line for 8 hours just to buy basic groceries, and never feel hunger. Raul Castro, the man who inherited power from his brother Fidel, remains the shadow pulling the strings behind the scenes. He no longer holds formal public office, but every major decision made by the regime, it is said, goes through his silent approval. He is the old guard, the one that no longer needs cameras to rule. By his side, protecting him, stands his grandson, Raul Guillermo Rodriguez Castro, known inside and outside Cuba as the Crab. While the Cuban people wait in 8-hour lines for a crate of eggs, investigative reports have documented that El Cangrejo takes dozens of private flights to Panama, travels in luxury jets alongside the Cuban military elite, and maintains ties with businessmen close to Venezuelan Chavism. He is the son of the late head of GAESA, the military conglomerate that controls most of Cuba's economy. He has been reported buying high-value goods, frequenting luxury nightlife spots, and traveling while his own country crumbles. And then there is Miguel Díaz-Canel, known as El Cingao, the appointed president, the public face who repeats the same litany in every speech, blaming the U.S. embargo as the sole cause of all the country's ills. He is the face the apparatus needs to show, while the real decisions are made elsewhere. Nor can you forget Sandro Castro, another grandson of the ruling family, who has become infamous on social media for his parties, luxury cars, and videos bragging about a lifestyle that contradicts, line by line, the discourse of austerity and sacrifice the regime demands from millions of ordinary Cubans. Here is the first truth this video wants you to understand. The crisis is not the same for everyone. There is a Cuba that goes dark, and there is a Cuba that has never known darkness. And behind that Cuba that never goes dark lies a name that almost no Cuban can fully explain, because no one, not even the state itself, has full access to its accounts. GAESA, the Business Administration Group SA, is a business conglomerate run by the Cuban Armed Forces. It does not publish financial statements. It does not appear in the national budget. Neither the National Assembly of People's Power nor the Office of the Comptroller General has the authority to audit its accounts. According to independent economic investigations, it is a parallel economy within the economy. It is estimated to control between 40 and 70% of the island's economic activity, with liquid reserves in dollars exceeding $14 billion, a figure higher than the international reserves of several countries in the region. While hospitals have no fuel for its ambulances, dialysis session, or open heart surgeries, GAESA owns the biggest luxury hotel chains hosting international tourists. While bread is rationed for you, GAESA controls the dollar stores selling products your salary could never afford. The conglomerate grew unchecked after Raul Castro took power in 2008, and for 26 years, it was headed by his own son-in-law, General Luis Alberto Rodriguez López Calleja, the father of the crab. When that general died, command passed to a colonel whose appointment was never officially announced to the Cuban people. In other words, there are two governments in Cuba. The one that appears on TV asking you for sacrifice and resistance against imperialism, and the other one, invisible, without accountability, controlling the real money of the country, and never ever running out of power. Now let's talk about how this ruin was built, because it wasn't a natural accident, it was a choice made over and over again. In January 2021, in the middle of the pandemic, the Cuban government launched what they called the Monetary Reorganization, a monetary reform that eliminated the convertible peso, which was the currency the Cuban government changed for dollars, unified currencies, and overnight devalued the Cuban peso. They promised it would boost production. Instead, it triggered hyperinflation. Prices skyrocketed, while wages remained frozen in misery. The man behind that reform was Alejandro Gil, then Minister of Economy and Planning and Vice Prime Minister, one of the most powerful officials in the country. Economists inside and outside Cuba warned from the beginning that the plan would fail, yet the regime implemented it anyway. For years, Gil was the public face of every unpopular measure, price hikes, fuel hikes, and promises of economic recovery that never materialized. And then, in February 2024, when the economic disaster could no longer be hidden, the very government that applauded his plan fired him from one day to the next. Months later, they formally accused him of espionage, embezzlement, bribery, tax evasion, and money laundering. They tried him in a closed-door court, without an independent press, without transparency, with his own family reporting that they didn't even have full access to his case file. In November 2025, he was sentenced to life in prison. Now ask yourself, does a man who executed the exact policies the Communist Party ordered him to execute suddenly become a foreign spy? Or is it simpler to realize they needed a single scapegoat for a crisis that was, in reality, a collective decision made by those in power? This pattern repeats over and over in Cuba like a loop that never breaks. First, they slightly open the market. Then, they lose control of that opening. Next, they apply restrictive measures to regain control. Those measures destroy the available supply. The destruction of supply triggers inflation, and inflation worsens the very crisis the original measure was supposed to solve. And so on, again from the beginning. You saw it with the MLC Stores, stores operating in freely convertible currency, which forced millions of Cubans without access to dollars out of being able to buy basic food in their own country. You saw it with the 2024 macroeconomic adjustment, which hit fuel, electricity, and transportation prices once again. And you saw it, in a brutal way, with the ETECSA price hike. In late May 2025, Cuba's sole telecommunications company, fully controlled by the dictatorship, announced an internet rate increase so aggressive that a single data package could cost the equivalent of several times a Cuban's monthly minimum wage. The official justification was to capture foreign currency to maintain the service. The reality, documented by independent media, was different. In the first 46 days after the increase, ETECSA collected over $500,000 daily, whereas before it barely collected $10,000. Most importantly, that price hike wasn't just about money. It sought something far more dangerous, limiting how much the Cuban people can connect with the outside world, with free information, and with the denunciations made by their own children from exile. And here comes the question the regime doesn't want you to ask. If there is no fuel for ambulances, if there is no fuel to generate electricity in hospitals, why is there always fuel, without fail, for political police cars and military operations that repress anyone who dares to protest? The answer is no coincidence. It's a priority. The regime decides every day who gets fuel and who is denied it, and repression is always first on the list. This priority is laid bare in the daily life of any Cuban neighborhood. If your house is burglarized, if a family member is assaulted in the street, or if you report a violent crime, the police response is almost always the same. We have no patrol cars, there is no fuel to dispatch officers, or the case is not an emergency. Police stations have become facilities paralyzed by the very same shortages affecting the rest of the country. However, the moment two people gather on a street corner to shout freedom, or the instant an entire neighborhood takes to the streets banging pots and pans during a blackout, that alleged lack of transportation magically vanishes within minutes. Out of nowhere, trucks filled with the National Revolutionary Police appear, patrol cars with full tanks arrive, plainclothes state security agents deploy, alongside with rapid response brigades equipped with batons and high-caliber weapons. For a citizen who is a victim of crime, there is no fuel. For a sick patient dying while waiting for an ambulance, there is none either. But to silence peaceful protest and protect the dictatorship's grip on power, the tank of repression never, ever runs empty. And here is perhaps the most cynical piece of the entire system. Meanwhile, there is no gasoline at gas stations. There are private importers with direct ties to power selling fuel on their own. When there is no electricity, there are private companies importing solar panels that cost $80 in any other country and selling them here for over $300. When there is no gas for cooking, private canisters appear at prices that most Cubans, earning state salaries of just a few dollars a month, could never afford. The pattern is always the same. The state creates the problem, destroys the public supply, and then sells you the private solution in dollars through companies owned by proxies of the dictatorship itself. They impoverish you only to sell you back your own survival at a premium. Yet amidst all of this, there are Cubans who refuse to stay silent. Ana Sofia Benitez, known as Ana Bensi, is a young content creator who started by posting simple videos and ended up fearlessly exposing the repression, misery, and corruption of the regime. Since then, state security has summoned her and interrogated her for over 8 consecutive hours on one occasion and nearly 11 hours on another. They have cut off her phone lines, hacked her accounts, and reopened archived legal cases against her and her own mother. They have offered her, as she herself revealed, 3 choices: stay quiet, leave the country, or face prison. She has responded time and again that she has no intention of backing down. And then there are Kamil Zayas and Ernesto Ricardo Medina, 2 young men from Holguin who created a small digital space called El Cuartico, where they simply discussed Cuban reality. On February 6th, state security agents raided their home at dawn, confiscated their cameras and equipment, and detained them without a clear warrant. They were charged with propaganda against the constitutional order and incitement to commit a crime, charges that could cost them up to 9 years in prison. Months later, they remain in pre-trial detention, without trial, without a date, in an obscurity that even the U.S. Embassy in Havana has publicly condemned. The crime of these young men was not stealing, attacking, or trafficking. It was simply telling the truth about what they live through every day. This is the true face of modern Cuba, a country where turning off the lights in a home takes less political effort than silencing the voice of a young person with a camera. A country where the resistance demanded of the people against imperialism translates, in practice, into 4-hour lines to buy bread, private generators reserved only for those who can afford them, and entire families torn apart because emigrating has become the only way to survive. A country where water supply is so scarce that its inhabitants are forced to collect rainwater to drink. A country where a liter of gas costs $8 and a bottle of soy oil, the cheapest one you can find, costs almost $10. 11 total power grid collapses since 2024. Thousands of documented political prisoners. A minister of economy sentenced to life in prison for executing the plan the party itself ordered him to execute. An island where gas, fuel, and even electricity have become luxury items sold in dollars by those who control both the problem and the solution. And yet, in the middle of the dark, every night, there are still Cubans who light a candle, pull out a phone with whatever battery they have left, and record one more video telling the world what is happening. This video is, above all, for them, for Anna Bensi, for Kamil and Ernesto, for every Cuban who today, once again, is left without light, while someone else, somewhere on that very same island, doesn't even know what a blackout is. From Stickstory, we hope with all our hearts that Cuba soon finds the freedom its people have been waiting for across generations. We want to go there on vacation and try ropa vieja and tamales and a good ranchon. If this video opened your eyes to what Cuba is really experiencing today, please hit like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments, what story about Cuban resistance do you think the world needs to hear next? See you in the next one!